The sound of her heels echoed across the polished marble floor of the Magnolia Cafe, that quiet Park Avenue sanctuary, where powerful men whispered deals over espresso and women in tailored suits pretended not to watch them. Sarah Ross didn't belong there, not in her faded denim jacket, not with a coffee stain on her white blouse, and certainly not with fire raging behind her eyes. She wasn't supposed to be here, but she was, and she had just seen him, Marcus, her best friend's fiancé, sitting there all charm and tailored arrogance, leaning close to a blonde woman who clearly wasn't Lisa. His hand brushed the woman's wrist, slow, practiced, intimate. The kind of gesture that screamed, "I've done this before." Sarah's heart pounded in her ears. She'd promised herself she wouldn't interfere again, that she'd stop being the friend who fights everyone's battles. But this betrayal was too much. Lisa had spent years building her life around that man. She'd skipped vacations, changed jobs, all for the wedding that was supposed to happen next month. "Not today," Sarah muttered under her breath. She stormed toward their table, ignoring the curious stares of the cafe's refined clientele. The air smelled of roasted beans and scandal. Marcus looked up, startled. Or at least she thought it was Marcus. "You absolute jerk," she snapped, slamming her hand on the table so hard that the blonde woman jumped. "How could you? Lisa gave you everything, and this is how you repay her. A public coffee date with your side piece." Gasps rippled through the room. The man blinked up at her, his gray-blue eyes narrowing. He didn't look confused, more like amused. "I think he said, voice low and cool, 'You've mistaken me for someone else.'" Sarah froze. The voice wasn't Marcus's. It was deeper, sharper, with the kind of command that silenced boardrooms. The blonde woman beside him looked half horrified, half delighted. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, the realization slamming into her. "You're not—" "No." The man interrupted, a faint smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. "I'm not Marcus, and you just called me— what was it?" A public cheater. Heat burned her cheeks. Well, to be fair, you do look like him from behind." "Lucky me," he said dryly, taking a sip of his espresso. "I'm sorry," Sarah stammered. Oh God." The entire cafe was staring now. A couple of older women were whispering. One even pulled out her phone. And that's when she saw the older woman across the table, the man's companion. Her posture regal, her eyes sharp with something between amusement and fascination. "Liam," the woman said with a knowing smile. "She's spirited. I like her." The man, Liam, sighed, resting his cup on the saucer. "Mother, please." Mother Sarah's jaw nearly hit the floor. She had just screamed at a man in front of his mother. I'm leaving," she blurted, backing away so fast she nearly tripped over a chair. "Enjoy your coffee, Mrs. whoever you are." But as she turned toward the door, the older woman called after her, "Miss Ross, wait." Sarah stopped dead. "How do you—" The woman smiled. "You dropped your business card when you slammed the table." Sarah looked down. Indeed, her Manhattan Meridian hotel card lay there beside the sugar jar, her name printed neatly. Sarah Ross, event manager. The woman held it up like a prize. "My name is Eleanor Watson. Perhaps we should talk sometime soon. I have a proposition." Sarah blinked. You want to hire me after I just—" Eleanor's eyes glittered. "Let's just say I admire a woman who's not afraid to speak her mind. My son could use someone like that." Liam groaned. "Mother?" But Eleanor only smiled, turning her gaze back to Sarah. "Tomorrow. 4 p.m., Watson Residence, Upper East Side. I'll send a car." Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She simply nodded dazed, then fled the cafe under a chorus of hushed murmurs and stifled laughter. Outside, the late autumn air slapped her face, sharp and cold. She leaned against the brick wall, breathing hard. "Perfect," she muttered. "Absolutely perfect. I just yelled at a billionaire in front of his mother." Brilliant Sarah. Across the street, a sleek black car idled. Through the tinted glass, she could have sworn she saw the same older woman watching her with a faint smile, like someone who'd just found exactly what she'd been looking for. That night, Sarah tossed and turned in her small Brooklyn apartment. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those gray-blue eyes staring back at her, unflinching, assessing, impossible to read. She tried to laugh it off. Billionaires didn't remember women who yelled at them. Right. Except the next morning, a white envelope slid under her door. Inside was a single card embossed in gold: Watson residence invitation. 4:00 p.m. Do not be late. No signature, no explanation, just a small handwritten line beneath it. A mistake can be the beginning of something extraordinary. E.W. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, heart thudding. She should throw it away. Forget this ever happened. She had work bills, an entire life that didn't include rich people with secrets. And yet, a part of her, the reckless, curious part that always got her into trouble, whispered, "What if you go? What if this is how everything changes?" That thought alone was enough to make her reach for her phone, staring at her reflection in the black screen. She whispered, "What's the worst that could happen?" But her pulse said otherwise, because deep down, she already knew whatever this was, it wouldn't be ordinary. And far above the city, in a penthouse that touched the clouds, Liam Watson looked out over Manhattan and told his mother, "You just invited chaos into my life." Eleanor smiled over her tea. "No, dear, I invited color into it." The rain came without warning that afternoon, thin silver needles falling against the glass walls of the Watson residence, a quiet fortress of marble and steel on the Upper East Side. Sarah stood under the awning, clutching her umbrella, heart hammering in her chest, as a black town car pulled away behind her. She had told herself she wouldn't come, that no amount of curiosity or guilt would drag her to the home of the man she'd humiliated in front of half of Park Avenue. Yet here she was, soaked and uncertain, staring up at the tall double doors of the billionaire's mansion. When they opened, a uniformed butler greeted her with the kind of politeness that made her feel small. "Miss Ross, Mrs. Watson is expecting you." Her throat tightened. Right, of course she is. Inside, the house smelled of rain and sandalwood, its air too still, too expensive. She followed the butler down a hallway lined with modern art and photographs of Manhattan from decades past. At the end waited Eleanor Watson, poised on a velvet chair near the fireplace, tea steaming gently in porcelain cups. "Sarah," she said, her voice smooth, deliberate, as if she'd known her for years. "You came." Sarah hesitated near the doorway. "Honestly, I'm not sure why. I thought maybe you wanted me to apologize again." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Oh no, if you were the type to apologize easily, I wouldn't be interested." "Interested?" "Sit down, dear. You'll want to hear this." Sarah sat careful not to spill anything on the cream-colored couch. Rain whispered against the windows. "My son Liam," Eleanor began pouring tea with perfect precision, "has a reputation problem. He's intelligent, capable, and far too cold for his own good. The board is pressing him to settle down to show stability, family values. Investors adore that sort of thing. But Liam refuses to date publicly, refuses to play the game." Sarah frowned. "And what does that have to do with me?" Eleanor's eyes gleamed. I saw the way you spoke to him yesterday. No fear, no pretense. He needs that. Someone who won't bend just because of his last name." Sarah laughed, softly disbelief lacing her tone. "You want me to?" "What?" "Teach your billionaire son a lesson in humility." Something like that. Eleanor leaned back, unbothered. "I'm offering you a contract marriage. 6 months. Appearances only. You'll attend functions. Smile for the cameras, act as his wife until the company's merger is finalized." Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You can't be serious." "Entirely. You'll be compensated generously, your debts cleared, and the medical expenses for your brother's surgery covered in full." Her breath caught. "How do you even know about my brother?" "I make it my business to know," Eleanor said simply. "You work hard, you take care of everyone else, and you don't ask for help. Admirable. But exhausting, isn't it?" Sarah's pulse stumbled. "That's not the point. You can't just buy people's lives." "I'm not buying you, dear. I'm giving you a choice." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened. Footsteps measured quiet, unmistakably his. Liam Watson stepped into the room, tall and composed in a gray suit, his expression unreadable. His gaze met hers for the briefest second, cool, detached, but something flickered there. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. "Mother," he said evenly. "What have you done now?" Eleanor smiled. "I've invited Miss Ross to join our family." Liam exhaled a trace of annoyance beneath his calm. "You mean the woman who publicly accused me of adultery?" Sarah crossed her arms. "To be fair, I apologized. Kind of. That makes it better. I didn't say that." He studied her eyes, traveling from her rain-soaked jacket to her clenched hands. "And you came here willingly?" "Apparently," she muttered, still trying to figure out why. Eleanor's voice cut through their tension. "Enough. You two can circle each other all day, or you can agree to something mutually beneficial. Liam, you need a partner for the merger gala next month. Sarah, you need relief from your financial strain. Why not help each other?" Liam looked at his mother, then back at Sarah. "You can't be serious." "I'm not doing it for fun," Sarah said, standing. "And trust me, marrying a man like you doesn't sound like my idea of a good time." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Amusement maybe, or challenge. "Then, don't." She grabbed her purse, ready to leave. But Eleanor's calm voice stopped her. "Think before you walk away, Sarah. Opportunity doesn't always look like salvation. Sometimes it looks like chaos knocking on your door." Sarah hesitated, her hand tightening on the strap. "And if I say yes?" Eleanor's smile softened. "Then you'll learn that chaos can change your life." Liam scoffed quietly, running a hand through his hair. "Unbelievable. You can't just throw strangers into my life and expect me to." "She's not a stranger anymore," Eleanor said firmly. "You'll sign the contract tonight." Sarah turned to him, defiance sparking in her voice. "I don't do anything without reading the fine print." "Good," Liam replied. "Neither do I." Hours later, Sarah found herself standing in his office, a glass-walled corner room overlooking the city. The rain had stopped, but the night still carried the scent of thunder. Liam handed her a folder. Inside, a 6-page agreement, typed in precise language that could make or break fortunes. "No intimacy," he said, almost clinically. "No personal involvement. This is business." "I figured," she said, scanning the clauses. "You're a romantic, I see." His mouth curved slightly. Not in the slightest. She hesitated at the final line. "Marriage to be conducted under mutual consent. Duration 6 months." "I can't believe this is real," she murmured. "Neither can I," he said quietly. When she finally signed, her hand trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what she was agreeing to. Liam signed after her, the motion swift, decisive. There. It's done. Just like that, just like that. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The city glittered below them, indifferent and alive. "You should know," she said softly. "I don't care about your money. I'm only doing this for my brother. And you should know," he replied, meeting her gaze. "I don't care about your reasons. Just don't complicate this." Sarah gave a faint, humorless smile. "Don't worry, Mr. Watson. I'm not the kind of woman who falls for billionaires." He stepped closer, his voice low enough to almost disappear into the hum of the city lights. "Good, because I'm not the kind of man who makes it easy." When she left that night, the ink was still drying on their signatures. Outside, the rain had turned into mist, blurring the edges of the streetlights. Sarah paused under the awning once more. Her reflection caught in the wet pavement, a woman who had just married a stranger, for reasons that felt both desperate and inevitable. Somewhere behind those glass walls, Liam watched her go, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. He told himself it was just business, a temporary arrangement. But as the door closed and her silhouette vanished into the city, he wasn't sure he believed it. Morning sunlight cut through the tall windows, drawing golden lines across the polished floors of the apartment. Sarah woke to the faint hum of the city and the quiet, measured rhythm of footsteps somewhere beyond her door. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it hit her. Central Park West, Liam Watson, a contract signed in ink that hadn't even fully dried. The scent of coffee drifted in from the kitchen. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonah, her brother. "They've scheduled my surgery for Thursday. The doctor says I'll be okay." She exhaled relief, swelling quietly in her chest. That was why she was here. Why she had agreed to live inside this glass palace with a man who didn't smile unless it served a purpose. When she walked out, Liam was already dressed for the day. Dark suit, crisp tie, posture, straight as if the world depended on it. He was standing by the counter phone in one hand, coffee in the other. His attention split perfectly between both. He didn't notice her at first, or maybe he did, and just didn't care to look. "Good morning," she said, tying her robe tighter. "Morning," he replied without glancing up. "You're really the picture of charm before breakfast, huh?" That earned a flicker of a look, half amusement, half irritation. "You don't have to talk to me in the morning. It's not in the contract." She smirked. "Neither is silence, but you seem pretty committed to it." That almost imperceptibly tugged the corner of his mouth. But he said nothing, just sipped his coffee and scrolled through another email. Sarah leaned against the counter. "So what's the plan today, husband?" The word made him pause. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely thrown off balance. "Don't call me that." "What should I call you then?" "Your Excellency, Mr. Control Issues." His eyes lifted to hers, steady, unblinking, a shade of gray that always felt like a challenge. "Liam will do." She smiled. "Liam it is." The air between them tightened. Outside, the city pulsed with life horns, blaring voices rising from the street below. But up here, everything was quiet, heavy, with the kind of silence that carried meaning. He finally broke it. "We have a meeting this afternoon at the hotel, a pre-gala briefing. You'll be expected to attend." Sarah frowned. "The Meridian, that's my old workplace." "I know. Which is exactly why your presence matters. Familiarity makes for good optics." "Optics," she repeated, rolling the word on her tongue. "You talk about people like they're lighting setups." He ignored the jab, checking his watch instead. "The driver will be here at 3. Wear something appropriate." She folded her arms. "Define appropriate. For once, not something that makes you look like you're ready to start a revolution." "Funny," she said, brushing past him. Revolutions tend to start when men like you underestimate women like me. By the time 3 o'clock arrived, Sarah had chosen a deep emerald dress that clung in all the right places, simple, elegant, the kind of outfit that made statements without needing words. When she stepped into the car, Liam's gaze flickered once quickly before he turned to the window. "You clean up well," he said finally. "So do you," she replied, settling into her seat. "Though I preferred the version of you from last night, the one who almost looked human." He didn't answer, but the faintest trace of a smile betrayed him. The drive to the hotel was short, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was layered questions, unsaid curiosity, neither of them admitted to. When they arrived, the lobby of the Meridian shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble, the smell of lilies filling the air. Sarah's heart twisted with an old familiar ache. She'd walked these halls for years. She'd known every face, every shift, every flaw behind the flawless surface. And now she was walking back through the same doors as Mrs. Liam Watson. The staff looked at her differently, curious, cautious. Some whispered. She could feel it. She smiled anyway, her chin, lifting her steps, measured. She wasn't here as an employee anymore. She was here as someone who belonged beside the man everyone wanted to impress. At the conference room, Liam fell easily into command. His voice carried low, decisive, magnetic, in that quiet way powerful men often are. She sat beside him, watching as he dissected presentations, redirected discussions, negotiated with a calm that was both infuriating and mesmerizing. Then, during a brief recess, she excused herself to get some air. That's when she heard it, a familiar voice behind her. "Well, well, Sarah Ross. Look who finally found her elevator to the top." She turned. Fiona Clark, the hotel's new operations director, smiled at her with a sweetness sharp enough to cut glass. "Fiona," Sarah said evenly. "Didn't realize you'd still be here." "Oh, I am," Fiona purred, glancing toward the meeting room. "And it looks like you've upgraded your company. How convenient, one day you're running event schedules, the next. You're married to the man who owns half of Manhattan." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I didn't marry anyone for convenience." "Of course not," Fiona said, feigning sympathy. "Love at first lawsuit, right?" Before Sarah could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem, Liam?" He'd stepped into the hallway, his presence immediately commanding. Fiona straightened, her confidence faltering for half a second. "Not at all. Or Watson," she said quickly, "just catching up with an old colleague." His gaze shifted to Sarah. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said, though her hands were still cold. He nodded once, then turned to Fiona. "Good. Because the next time you decide to catch up, make sure it doesn't sound like gossip. I don't tolerate that in my properties." Fiona's lips parted in shock, but she said nothing. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction she didn't want to admit. Back in the car later, she finally said, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. I can handle myself, you know." "I don't doubt it," he said. "But she won't try it again." She studied him for a moment, the city passing in a blur outside the window. "You're not what I expected." He turned to her, one brow raised. "What did you expect? An emotionless robot with too many cufflinks?" A quiet laugh escaped him. "And now?" She hesitated. "Now I'm not sure what to think." When they returned to the apartment, dusk had already painted the skyline in shades of blue and gold. Sarah kicked off her heels and leaned against the window, watching the city pulse below. Liam loosened his tie, his reflection faint beside hers. "You did well today," he said softly. "I didn't do anything. You didn't crumble. That's something." She turned to look at him, and for a second, neither moved. The air between them shifted warmer, heavier, threaded with something unspoken. "Tell me something, Liam," she said quietly. "What's it like?" Never letting anyone close, he studied her, his voice low, almost weary. Safe and lonely. He didn't answer. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe safety isn't all it's cracked up to be. His eyes met hers, then something raw flickering there before he looked away. "Good night, Sarah." He walked down the hall, leaving her alone with the city lights and the faint echo of something neither of them were ready to name. The next morning unfolded with a quiet tension that hummed beneath the polished calm of the apartment. Sarah woke to the faint clatter of dishes, an unfamiliar sound in a place where silence usually reigned. When she stepped into the kitchen, Liam was there, sleeves rolled tie loosened, pouring coffee like a man who'd never been taught what to do with free time. He looked different in the daylight, less immaculate, more human. Still too controlled, but the edges seemed softer somehow. "You're up early," she said, reaching for a mug. He handed her one without looking up. "Big day. My mother's hosting a charity brunch at the Meridian. You're coming." Sarah blinked. Again with the Meridian, he glanced over, a voice even. "It's one of our properties, and she wants to introduce you to people who matter to you." Maybe, she murmured, then sipped her coffee. "What exactly am I supposed to do there?" "Smile and pretend I'm not terrified of accidentally drinking a $12,000 mimosa." He smirked faintly. "Just be yourself, as long as yourself doesn't throw wine at anyone." "Ha ha," she said dryly, setting her mug down. "So, this is what marriage looks like to you. Business meetings and polite threats. This isn't marriage," he said quietly. "You know that." His words landed sharper than she expected. She met his eyes, the silence between them too charged to name. By the time they arrived at the hotel, the ballroom had already transformed into a dream of crystal and soft jazz. Tables glowed beneath gold-trimmed linens, and the city's elite floated through the room like swans. Every smile calculated, every glance weighted. Eleanor Watson stood at the center of it all, a vision in silver silk surrounded by admirers. When she saw Sarah, her eyes lit up sharp and assessing. "My dear," Eleanor said, air-kissing her cheek, "you look radiant." Sarah smiled politely. "You always know how to make an entrance." Eleanor laughed low and deliberate. "A woman in my world has to." Her gaze shifted subtly toward Liam. "You should learn that too, darling. Your wife already has." Liam's jaw tensed. "Mother, can we not do this here?" "Oh, relax. The world loves a little family tension. It makes us relatable." Before he could respond, someone new joined them, a tall man with slicked hair and a perfectly rehearsed smile. "Liam Watson," he said, extending a hand. "Always a pleasure. And this must be your wife. I'm Grant Morrison, finance chair of the foundation." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the subtle condescension in his gaze. "Nice to meet you." Grant's smile tightened. "I have to say, the press loves your story. It's refreshing, a self-made woman from Brooklyn marrying into one of the oldest families in New York. Almost cinematic." Liam's tone dropped an octave. "Careful, Grant." Grant chuckled, sipping his champagne. "No offense meant. I'm sure Sarah here is very adaptable." Sarah's lips curved, though her pulse quickened. "Oh, don't worry. I adapt quickly, especially when people underestimate me." Grant blinked, then forced a laugh. "Well said." Eleanor's eyes gleamed, pride flickering there. Liam looked at Sarah, something like surprise passing through his expression. For the first time that morning, He didn't seem entirely in control. Hours later, after speeches and photographs, and too many insincere smiles, Sarah slipped out to the terrace overlooking Central Park. The late afternoon sun washed the skyline in shades of gold and ash. She needed airspace to breathe, without pretending. Trying to escape a voice asked behind her, she turned. Fiona stood by the doorway, glass in hand, wearing the kind of smirk that never meant kindness. "Just taking a break," Sarah said evenly. "Must be exhausting," Fiona replied. "All those smiles, all that pretending. You play the part well, though. For someone who was scheduling banquets last year, you've come far." Sarah kept her voice calm. "What do you want, Fiona?" "Oh, nothing," Fiona said, stepping closer. "Just thought you should know some of the board members are curious. They wonder how a hotel employee managed to capture New York's most eligible CEO." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Tell them I didn't capture anything. It's not that kind of story." "Isn't it?" Fiona tilted her head. "You do realize everyone here thinks you're temporary, that once the merger's done, you'll fade back into wherever you came from. Liam Watson doesn't fall for anyone's sweetheart, especially not someone like you." Something cold rose in Sarah's chest. She didn't let it show. "If you're trying to insult me, you'll have to do better." Fiona smiled. "Oh, I don't have to. Time will do it for me." A quiet voice cut through the tension. "Time's up, Fiona." Sarah turned. Liam was there, his expression unreadable, but his presence unmistakable. Fiona stiffened. "I was just congratulating your wife," Fiona said quickly. "Don't," he said. "You're terrible at pretending sincerity." Color drained from Fiona's face. Without another word, she walked back inside. Sarah crossed her arms. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said softly, "I did." She studied him. "You can't keep rescuing me every time someone decides to be awful." "I'm not rescuing you," he replied. "I'm reminding people who they're dealing with." "And who is that exactly?" His gaze lingered on her, steady and unreadable. A woman who shouldn't have to defend herself in rooms built to keep her out. For a moment, neither spoke. The city wind tugged at her hair, the scent of rain drifting between them. Sarah turned away, her throat tight. "You talk like that, and I almost believe you have a soul," she said quietly. He smiled, faint and wry. "Don't ruin my reputation." When they returned inside, the room shifted. Conversations quieted, eyes followed. Eleanor was standing near the grand staircase, her posture tense. A man stood beside her, older, graying, his presence commanding in a colder way than Liam's. "Richard," Liam said, voice clipped. "His father." Sarah had seen his name in articles on magazine covers, always described as the man behind the empire. Seeing him in person, she understood why. He radiated precision, the kind that never softened. "Son," Richard said smoothly, extending a hand that felt more like a test than a greeting. "And this must be the wife." Sarah offered her hand. "Sarah Ross." His eyes flicked over her, measuring, calculating. "Ross, as in, not Watson." "Correct," she said. "Interesting choice, Liam." Richard continued, the faintest smile ghosting his face. "Though I suppose every dynasty needs a modern twist." "Careful," Eleanor said, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. "You're starting to sound like a man from another century." Richard's gaze lingered on her before returning to Sarah. "Well, Ms. Watson, I hope you understand what kind of world you've stepped into. It doesn't always welcome outsiders." Sarah smiled coolly. "Then I'll just have to make it change its mind." Liam's lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. Eleanor's eyes gleamed with approval. Richard only raised his glass and walked away. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and hollow laughter. By the time they left, Sarah's feet ached and her head throbbed, but something in her chest felt different, steady, certain. She'd survived the scrutiny, the whispers, the veiled insults. She'd stood her ground. Back in the car, the city moved past in streaks of gold and blue. Liam glanced at her, once, then again. "You were impressive," he said finally. She smiled faintly, leaning her head against the glass. "Get used to it." He didn't reply, but as the driver turned onto their street, Liam found himself watching her reflection in the window, the quiet strength in her expression, the soft defiance in her posture, and realized something unsettling. For the first time, he didn't see her as part of the contract. He saw her as the one person in the room who hadn't needed his name to command attention. The sound of rain against the windows had become familiar, steady, rhythmic like a heartbeat, trying to soothe something restless inside her. Sarah sat curled on the couch, barefoot laptop, balanced on her knees, reviewing the proposal drafts she'd brought home from the hotel. Across the room, Liam was on a call, his voice low, clipped, the kind of tone that could silence a room even through glass. She tried not to listen, but certain words carried anyway. Merger, investors, restructuring, optics. He spoke the way he moved, clean lines, no hesitation, no waste. And yet, something about it tonight felt different. The sharpness wasn't all business. There was an edge underneath it, a tension he didn't usually show. When the call ended, he stood still for a moment, one hand resting on the back of the couch as if bracing himself. "You okay?" she asked softly. He looked over, startled, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "Just work. Work doesn't make people stare at walls." He exhaled through his nose, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "You're observant. It's my job. I watch people all day. It's how I keep my events from falling apart." He loosened his tie and sat across from her elbows, on his knees, eyes on the rain. "There's a leak," he said absently. "In the company, not the roof. Someone's been feeding merger details to Morrison's firm." Sarah frowned. "Grant Morrison. The guy from the brunch." He nodded. "He's trying to force my hand, wants access to the board seat my father controls. If he leaks enough to the press, it'll look like we can't manage internal security. Can't you just trace where it's coming from? I'm working on it. But it's like playing chess against someone who already knows your next move." Sarah closed her laptop and leaned back. "You sound tired." "I am," he admitted quietly. "My father thinks I'm too soft. The board thinks I'm too reckless. My mother thinks I need a wife to fix it." Her smile faded at the last part. "And what do you think?" He looked at her, then, eyes a shade darker in the dim light. "I think I've made peace with being misunderstood." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain. It softened the edges of the world, blurring everything that was too sharp to face head-on. She wanted to say something, anything, but before she could, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen, brow furrowing. It was an email. Anonymous tip. "Your promotion at the Meridian might not be real. Check your files before you celebrate." Her stomach twisted. "What the hell?" she muttered, opening her laptop again. "What is it?" Liam asked. She hesitated. "Something's off. Someone's been using my account at the hotel, sending reports I didn't write." He straightened. "Show me." Within minutes, they were both leaning over her laptop. A series of fabricated memos glowed on the screen, emails sent from her address to the hotel's regional director, making her look careless, even incompetent. Liam's jaw tightened. "This isn't an accident." She looked up at him, her voice low. "It's Fiona. It has to be. Can you prove it?" "Not yet. But she's been gunning for me since I came back. And now this. It's too precise. She wants me gone. Liam studied the screen, his reflection flickering across it. Then we'll make her regret it. Sarah blinked. He didn't look away. You're my wife, at least on paper. Anyone who goes after you is picking a fight with me. Her throat tightened. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. The conviction in his tone was quiet, but solid. She didn't argue again. Later that night, they met with Eleanor in her private study, a room that smelled of old books and garden roses. She sat behind a walnut desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, looking every bit the queen of her empire. I warned you about Fiona Clark, she said without preamble. That woman's ambition is corrosive. She plays the long game. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I can handle it. Eleanor's gaze softened slightly. I don't doubt that, dear. But this isn't about the hotel anymore. It's about control. Fiona thinks if she discredits you, she embarrasses Liam. And if Liam looks weak, Morrison wins. Sarah's stomach sank. So, I'm part of their power play. Eleanor folded her hands. Welcome to Manhattan. Liam leaned against the desk, arms crossed. We'll counter it. Publicly. Eleanor raised a brow. How's Sarah's event next week, the Winter Charity Gala? It's under her management. We'll make sure it's flawless, televised, and profitable. She'll be front and center. If Morrison's trying to smear her, we'll make her untouchable. Sarah blinked, caught between disbelief and pride. You're turning a charity gala into a PR war. He glanced at her. I'm turning it into proof. Eleanor smiled faintly. Now that sounds like my son. By the time they returned to the apartment, it was nearly midnight. The city outside shimmered under the rain glass, and gold reflecting in every puddle. Sarah kicked off her heels, exhausted. You didn't have to go that far, she said quietly. Liam loosened his cufflinks. Yes, I did. If people want to test us, they should at least see what they're up against. Us. Huh, she said, her voice soft. You're finally starting to sound like a team player. He met her gaze, something wry and vulnerable flickering behind his composure. Don't tell anyone. She smiled, despite herself. But beneath the teasing, she felt something heavier, a current she didn't want to name. Gratitude, maybe. Or something dangerously close to trust. A few days later, the gala arrived. The ballroom gleamed like a world made of light crystal chandeliers, scattering reflections across silk gowns and tuxedos. Reporters swarmed near the entrance, flashes bursting like fireworks. Sarah stood beside Liam, calm, on the outside, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might echo through the marble floors. You ready? He asked quietly. She nodded. As I'll ever be. When they stepped into the room, conversations stilled for a heartbeat. The crowd turned curiosity, admiration, envy, all mingling in the air like perfume. Cameras clicked. Liam placed a steady hand on her back, guiding her forward with an ease that looked rehearsed, but wasn't. He spoke to investors to press to the board, but every time he looked down at her, something shifted. His tone softened, his posture loosened, his mask cracked just slightly, and people noticed. Whispers followed them through the room, half speculation, half awe. Maybe it's real. Maybe she changed him. During the final toast, as the lights dimmed and the music swelled, Sarah found herself standing at the balcony, looking out at the city she used to chase from a distance. Liam joined her hands in his pockets. You did it, he said quietly. Every board member in that room just fell in love with your event. She laughed under her breath. That's one way to describe survival. He turned toward her, his voice lower now. It's more than survival. It's grace under fire. You didn't just prove them wrong. You reminded them why they underestimate people like you at their own risk. Her chest tightened. The sincerity in his tone disarmed her more than any compliment could. "Careful," she whispered. "You're starting to sound like you care." His eyes caught hers, steady and unflinching. "Maybe I do." The music from inside faded into something distant and slow. She didn't move, afraid to break whatever fragile moment hung between them. The rain had stopped hours ago, but droplets still clung to the railing, catching the city lights like small stars. When he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her breath hitched. His fingers lingered just long enough to make her wonder what would happen if she didn't pull away. But she did, eventually. "Don't," she said softly, almost to herself. This wasn't part of the contract. He smiled faintly, not denying it, not apologizing either. Neither was defending you. And then he walked back inside, leaving her alone with the sound of the city and the quiet chaos he'd just left in her chest. Morning broke pale and restless over Manhattan. The first light slid between the towers, cutting through glass and shadow, finding its way into the Watson apartment where the air still held the faint smell of rain and tension. Sarah stood in the kitchen barefoot, pouring herself coffee, eyes fixed on the skyline that looked too clean for the kind of storm brewing beneath it. Liam hadn't slept. She could tell by the way he moved, too still, too controlled, his shirt, already buttoned cufflinks gleaming like armor. He'd been pacing between calls since dawn, chasing answers that refused to come. "Did you eat?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Not hungry." "Try anyway," she said, setting a plate of toast on the counter. "You think better when you remember you're human." He gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll keep that in mind." The silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of city noise bleeding through the windows. Sarah sipped her coffee, watching him scroll through emails, his jaw tight. "Any luck? Whoever's inside the company covered their tracks too well. I've narrowed it down to 3 people, but none of them make sense." "Maybe that's the point," she said. "The ones who look wrong are usually the ones who aren't pretending." He looked up at her then, as if something in her tone pulled him out of his spiral. "You sound like you've been here before." She shrugged. "You learn to read people when you've spent years smiling at them while they lie to your face." Their eyes met, and something flickered there. Recognition, maybe. The shared exhaustion of 2 people who'd spent too long pretending they didn't care. He set the tablet down. "We need to step back from this for a day. Go quiet. Let Morrison think he's winning." Sarah frowned. "And what just—" "Wait." "Not exactly," he said, voice softening. "Come with me. There's a place I go when I need to think." She hesitated, but the look in his eyes wasn't a request. It was an escape, disguised as an offer. 2 hours later, they were in a car heading north, trading skyscrapers for open road and autumn trees, turning copper in the early light. The farther they drove, the quieter he became, and the easier it was for her to breathe. "Where are we going?" she asked eventually. He glanced at her. "Upstate. My mother used to take me there when the city felt too heavy. It's quiet." "Quiet sounds nice," she said, turning her face to the window. They reached the Watson estate by noon, a sprawling modern retreat perched on the edge of a lake that looked like liquid glass. The house was all wood and stone, and stillness surrounded by birch trees and the faint call of birds. Sarah stepped out the wind, brushing her hair, the scent of pine washing over her. "I can't believe this is only a few hours from Manhattan." "That's the trick," he said. "Everything feels far enough away, but it's still close enough to pull you back." Inside, the place felt untouched, as if frozen in time. Family photos lined the hallway, Eleanor's sharp smile, a younger Liam beside her. No father in sight. Sarah paused at one picture, Liam maybe 10 years old, standing by the lake laughing. "You look happy here," she said. He followed her gaze. That was before the world started expecting things. They spent the afternoon in an uneasy calm. He took calls from the terrace, his voice low and distant, while she wandered along the lake, skipping stones, thinking of everything and nothing. It was strange how silence with him no longer felt like suffocation. When she returned, he was waiting outside with 2 glasses of wine, the late sun painting gold over the water. "I didn't think you were the kind of man who keeps wine by a lake," she teased, sitting beside him. "I didn't think I was either," he said. "But apparently you bring out strange habits." She smiled faintly. "Like what?" "Like talking more than I should. Maybe that's not a bad thing." For a moment, they just sat there, the kind of quiet between them that didn't need to be filled. The lake rippled a slow reflection of the sky's fading light. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "When I started this, when my mother pushed for this marriage, I thought I was doing her a favor. A transaction to keep the press happy, the investors calm. I know," she said. "It's not like I was expecting love letters." He looked at her, then really looked, as though the words he wanted to say had nowhere else to go. But somewhere between the noise and the pretending, it stopped feeling like business. Her heart stuttered, a slow, fragile ache blooming in her chest. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what say things you can't take back." He exhaled, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You think I don't mean it? I think you don't know what you mean," she said quietly. "You've built walls for so long that anything that cracks them feels like truth. But it might just be the air finally getting in." He smiled faintly, but it wasn't amusement. It was resignation. "You might be right." They fell silent again. The last of the sunlight dissolved behind the trees, and the air grew colder. Sarah pulled her sweater closer around her shoulders, shivering slightly. Without a word, Liam stood, took off his jacket and draped it over her. "Thanks," she murmured. He didn't move away. "You always think everything has to make sense," he said. "But what if it doesn't? What if this, whatever it is, just exists?" She looked up at him. "Then it ends, the moment we start pretending it doesn't." The tension between them was quiet but magnetic. He knelt down beside her, his face close enough for her to see the tired lines near his eyes, the way his breath trembled slightly when it met hers. For a heartbeat, it felt inevitable, the pull, the silence, the closeness. But she stood abruptly, turning toward the house. "We should head back before it gets dark." He stayed there, kneeling by the lake, watching her walk away. Dinner was quiet, filled with the clinking of silverware and the crackle of fire. Neither of them spoke about what almost happened. Instead, they talked about small things, the weather, her brother's recovery, the dog Eleanor once had that used to chase ducks along the lake. It was easier than honesty. Later, when she went to bed, she couldn't sleep. The moonlight spilled across the floor in pale bands, and through the thin walls, she could hear him moving in the next room. She wondered if he was sleeping any better than she was. Outside, a wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain again. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low and slow. She thought about how strange it was, this fragile calm between them, like the quiet before something you couldn't stop even if you wanted to. In the room next door, Liam sat awake in the dark, a single lamp still burning beside him. His phone buzzed again, another message from Morrison, this time with a photograph attached. He opened it and froze. The picture showed him and Sarah on the balcony, at the gala, her hand in his, faces close mid-laughter. The caption beneath it read, "Some contracts look more like confessions." For a long moment he said nothing. The rain began again, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the glass, like a warning. Liam closed his eyes. Somewhere deep down, He understood that whatever line they'd both been walking had just disappeared. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the lake wrapped in silver mist. The world outside the cabin was still, but inside, silence had weight. Sarah stood at the window, coffee cooling in her hands, staring at the gray blur of the water. She hadn't seen Liam since the night before. His car was still in the driveway, but his room was empty. Only his phone face down on the table told her he hadn't gone far. She turned when she heard footsteps. He came in quietly, his coat damp, his hair slightly tousled by the morning wind. He looked tired, but there was something else in his expression too. Something unreadable, like he was carrying news he didn't want to speak aloud. "You've been out," she said. He nodded once. Needed air. She studied him. Or distance. Maybe both. He poured himself coffee, then leaned against the counter silent for a long moment before saying, "Morrison has a photo of us. From the gala. He's threatening to release it." Sarah froze. "What?" "It looks like we're—" He trailed off, searching for words that didn't make him sound like he cared too much. "Close." She set her cup down slowly. "So, let him. We're married. People can draw their own conclusions. This isn't about gossip," he said. "If that picture gets out, it'll look like I fabricated the marriage to manipulate investor sentiment. It could kill the merger." Her pulse quickened. "And what do you plan to do about it?" "I'm going to handle it," he said, his tone clipped. "By paying him off." His eyes lifted to hers, sharp. "By reminding him who he's dealing with." There it was, the part of him that always returned when the world pressed too hard. Cold, measured, merciless. "Liam," she said softly, "you can't fight everything like it's a war." "It usually is," he said. "You just don't always see the casualties." She swallowed. "And what happens when I become one of them?" The question hung there, fragile as the mist outside. He didn't answer. By afternoon, they were back in the city. The rhythm of Manhattan hit them. The moment the car turned off the bridge horns, footsteps, life happening too loudly for two people carrying silence. Sarah didn't ask where they were going until they pulled up in front of a narrow brownstone in Harlem. He opened her door. "My mother used to bring me here," he said quietly. "It's where she grew up." Inside, the place smelled faintly of wood polish and time. Photos covered the walls, Eleanor as a young woman smiling, beside community leaders holding babies, standing in marches. It was more humanity than Sarah had ever seen in the Watson family name. "Why bring me here?" she asked. "Because I wanted you to see what the world looked like before the money," he said. "Before the name." She traced a finger along the frame of one photograph, Eleanor standing in front of a brick building with a hand-painted sign, Watson Youth Center. "She built this," Sarah murmured. Liam nodded. She started with nothing but a loan and a promise to her mother that she'd give back what she was given. The foundation still funds schools, shelters, scholarships. Sarah turned to him, eyes softening. "That's what she meant when she said you'd lost sight of where you came from." He smiled faintly. "She's been telling me that since I was 25. They wandered through the house, the sound of the city muffled beyond the windows. For a brief moment, it felt like they were suspended outside of time. Two people pretending that the world wasn't waiting to devour them. When they reached the kitchen, Liam pulled a box from one of the cupboards, setting it on the counter. Inside were old newspaper clippings, letters, and a small velvet pouch. He opened it carefully, revealing a gold locket. "My mother wore this when she met my father," he said. He promised her the world. Then he gave her a company instead. Sarah looked up. "You think you're like him?" "I don't think," he said quietly. I know I've spent my whole life making sure I wouldn't be and somehow ended up halfway there anyway. She stepped closer. You're not him, Liam. You built something on your own terms. You protect people even when you don't know how to say it out loud. He met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. And what about you? Who protects you? She hesitated. I stopped waiting for someone to. Their eyes held for a beat too long. Then she looked away, pretending to study the photographs again. You should keep that locket. Maybe it'll remind you what really matters. I already have something for that, he said. She turned back, confused, but he said nothing more. The next day brought no calm. Morrison's story broke before noon. A photo of Liam and Sarah blown up across every business site and gossip column. The marriage merger was love, just another power move. By the time she reached the Watson Dynamics building, the lobby was chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. Inside the elevator, she caught her reflection, composed, calm, perfectly controlled. It was a lie. Liam was in his office, voice raised for the first time since she'd met him. His father was there too, standing by the window, expression cool and unimpressed. Do you realize what you've done? Richard Watson's voice was sharp as glass. You've tied this company's credibility to a tabloid circus. It's being handled, Liam said through clenched teeth. Handled, Richard snapped. You're one headline away from tanking shareholder confidence. This woman, he gestured toward Sarah, has been a liability from the start. Sarah flinched, but Liam didn't let him finish. Don't talk about her like that. Richard's eyebrows rose. Don't tell me she's gotten under your skin. This isn't about that. Oh, it always is, Richard said. You let emotion cloud judgment, and the empire falls. Ask your mother. Don't bring her into this, Liam warned. I already did, Richard said, voice softening just enough to make it crueler. Eleanor built a name. You're turning it into a headline. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Sarah finally spoke. You want someone to blame, blame me. But don't talk to him like that. Richard turned to her, amused. You think you can stand in this room and understand what's at stake? She met his gaze evenly. I understand loyalty. And right now, you're teaching your son it's conditional. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Richard laughed softly, a dry, humorless sound, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Liam stood there, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the city beyond the glass. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. He turned then, and something in his face broke open, something raw, unguarded. You don't get it, Sarah. My whole life has been about control, about making sure no one sees a crack. And now, she stepped closer. Now what? Now all I can think about is you standing there defending me when you shouldn't have to. The words hung there, fragile and dangerous. He moved toward her slowly, the distance shrinking until there was barely a breath between them. Tell me to stop, he said quietly. She didn't. When he kissed her, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't gentle either. It was desperate, messy, real, two people holding on because the world outside was built to take everything away. Her hands found his collar. His fingers brushed the side of her face. For a moment, the noise disappeared. The merger, the headlines, the lies, none of it existed. When they finally broke apart, she whispered against his chest, You just complicated everything. He exhaled, forehead resting against hers. It was already complicated. They stood there in silence, the city humming around them, two hearts trying to beat in sync, while the world kept count outside the glass. The city had never seemed louder. Even with the office door closed, Sarah could hear the chaos beyond phones ringing, heels striking the marble floor, the relentless murmur of people dissecting a story that wasn't supposed to exist. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, reporters, old coworkers, even friends from the hotel she hadn't spoken to in months. They all wanted the same thing. A quote, a confirmation, a confession. She ignored them all. Liam stood by the window, tie loose. His reflection blurred against the skyline. He hadn't spoken much since their argument with his father. The quiet wasn't comfortable. This time it felt like standing in the eye of something waiting to destroy them both. "You should go home," he said finally, his voice low. She looked up from the stack of printed headlines. "And leave you here to clean up the mess alone. It's not your mess, isn't it?" she said softly. "My face is on half those articles. They don't just see you, they see us." He turned then, something fierce in his expression. That's exactly the problem. The words hit harder than they should have. She swallowed. "So, what? You regret it?" The kiss me, he ran a hand through his hair. Frustration sharp in his movements. "It's not about regret, Sarah. It's about timing. You and I, we exist in a space that was never meant to hold anything real." "Then why does it feel real?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the window, his silhouette outlined by the light of a city that would never forgive weakness. "I need to meet with the board," he said finally. "They're demanding an emergency session tonight. If I can convince them this won't derail the merger, we'll survive the week. And if you can't..." He looked at her eyes, tired but steady. "Then I lose everything I built." Sarah's heart tightened. "You won't lose me." He gave a faint, sad smile. "That's the one thing I don't get to keep." The hours that followed blurred together. She spent them in a haze of calls and damage control, her name now entangled with his in every news cycle. Even Jonah called his voice heavy with concern. "You okay, Sarah?" "I'm fine," she lied. He hesitated. "You don't sound fine." "I'll be okay. Just focus on getting better, okay?" When the call ended, she sat in the darkened apartment, the city glowing faintly beyond the glass. Every part of her wanted to run to escape the noise, the judgment, the endless reminder that she'd stepped into a world that didn't know how to forgive people like her for existing in it. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Liam stood there, his tie gone now, his face drawn. "The board meeting's over," he said quietly. She stood. "And I managed to buy us some time. They'll move forward with the merger, but only if we distance ourselves publicly until it's finalized." "Distance ourselves," she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. He nodded once. "No public appearances, no photos, no pretending to be married," she finished for him. He hesitated. "It's temporary." She laughed softly, but it didn't sound like humor. "Temporary always turns into permanent, with people like you, doesn't it?" "Sarah, don't," she said, cutting him off. "Don't stand there and tell me it's just business when we both know it stopped being that weeks ago." He didn't argue. He couldn't. They stood there in the half-light, the space between them thick with everything they couldn't say. Then slowly he stepped closer, not enough to touch, just enough for her to feel the heat of his presence. "If this were any other world," he said quietly, "I'd ask you to stay." Her eyes met his. "Then maybe we should stop pretending this is your world." Neither moved for a long time. Then she turned away, blinking hard. "I'm going to Boston tomorrow. My mom wants me home for a while." He exhaled as if he'd known that was coming. "Good," he said, though it didn't sound like he meant it. "You'll be safe there." "You mean I'll be gone?" she said. He looked down, his voice barely audible. "Maybe that's what safe means right now." The next morning she left before sunrise. The city was still half asleep, the streets slick from last night's rain. She didn't wake him. She couldn't. The note she left on the counter was simple. Don't fight the storm alone. The train ride to Boston felt like moving through someone else's life. The world outside the window blurred into streaks of gray and green, the hum of the tracks a steady reminder that distance didn't always make things easier. Her mother was waiting at the station, warmth in her eyes that made Sarah's composure crack. "Baby, you look tired." "I'm fine, Mom." "You always say that when you're not." They drove through the familiar streets of Roxbury, past the old church and the bakery that still smelled like cinnamon. The house looked the same as ever, white siding, a porch that creaked when you stepped on the third plank. Inside, it smelled like coffee and safety. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table watching her mother make tea. "You ever regret leaving, Dad?" she asked suddenly. Her mother paused, spoon halfway to the cup. "Sometimes. But then I remember the difference between love that lifts you and love that traps you." Why? Sarah hesitated. "I think I met someone who could be both." Her mother looked at her for a long time, then reached across the table, taking her hand. "Then you better decide which one you're willing to live with." The next few days passed in slow motion. Sarah tried to find comfort in the quiet, the hum of the old refrigerator, the sound of rain against the windows. But her thoughts kept circling back to Manhattan, to Liam, to the way his voice had softened when he said her name. On the fourth night, her phone buzzed. It was Eleanor Watson. "Sarah," Eleanor said, her tone brisk, but not unkind. "We need to talk." Sarah straightened. "Is Liam okay?" "He's fine, for now. But Morrison isn't done. He's going to drop another story next week, claims of financial misconduct tied to the merger. None of it's true, but it will hit hard. Liam's in meetings nonstop. He won't tell you this, but he's burning himself out, trying to protect you and the company at once." Sarah's chest tightened. "What do you want me to do?" "Come back," Eleanor said simply. "Not for him, for yourself. Don't let people like Morrison define who you are. You've survived worse than gossip." The call ended, leaving Sarah staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Somewhere deep down, she already knew she was going back. Not because Eleanor asked, but because she couldn't stand the thought of him facing it alone. When she returned to Manhattan 2 days later, the air felt heavier, the tension thicker. She went straight to the Watson building. The security guard gave her a surprised look, but didn't stop her. She found Liam in the conference room, papers scattered across the table, sleeves rolled up, exhaustion carved into his features. He didn't notice her at first, not until she said quietly, "You look terrible." He froze. Then slowly he lifted his head. "Sarah." She crossed the room, stopping just short of him. "You didn't think I'd stay away forever, did you?" He blinked, disbelief softening into something like relief. "You shouldn't be here." "Probably not," she said. "But then, neither of us ever do what we should." For a moment, neither moved. Then quietly he said, "You came back. I told you." She said, her voice steady now. "You don't fight storms alone." He looked at her for a long time, then whispered almost to himself, "Maybe I don't have to anymore." Outside, the city lights blurred against the glass, and for the first time in weeks, the noise seemed to fade. They stood there in the quiet, two people who had tried and failed to stay apart, bound not by circumstance, but by the simple, unyielding truth that some things once real don't disappear, no matter how hard the world tries to rewrite them. The morning of the hearing arrived wrapped in gray clouds and wind that felt colder than it should for spring. Manhattan was half-awake, traffic inching forward, umbrellas flashing open like dark flowers. Inside the Watson Dynamics Tower, everything felt too bright, too polished, like the city had decided to hold its breath for whatever came next. Sarah stood outside the conference hall, her palms pressed against the cool marble wall. Through the glass, she could see Liam surrounded by lawyers, his expression carved from the same stillness she'd seen in him the night they first met. He wore control like a second skin, but she knew better now. She could see the strain behind it, the small tremor in his jaw, the way his hand flexed when no one was watching. Eleanor appeared beside her, calm and elegant, as always, a faint smile touching her lips. "He hasn't slept," she said softly. "I know." "He listens to you," Eleanor said, "even when he pretends not to." Sarah glanced toward the door. Maybe he shouldn't. Eleanor's eyes softened. "You're the first person who ever made him question what he was building and who he was building it for. That's not a weakness, dear. That's his salvation." Before Sarah could respond, the doors opened. A young assistant gestured for them to come in. The boardroom stretched wide and silent, lined with dark wood and tension. Cameras blinked red from the corners. Morrison sat at the far end of the table, perfectly composed, his smirk small and sharp. Beside him was Fiona Eyes, cold, posture rehearsed. Sarah's stomach twisted at the sight. Liam didn't look up as they entered. He stood at the head of the table, every inch the man the press had once called untouchable. But when his gaze finally met Sarah's, something shifted. His shoulders eased, his breath steadied. Richard Watson sat near the center, silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked at his son with the kind of silence that could cut glass. The chairman cleared his throat. "Let's begin. Mr. Morrison, you've accused the Watson Foundation and Watson Dynamics of falsifying financial data related to the merger. You've presented evidence leaked from internal communications. Do you stand by your claims?" "I do," Morrison said smoothly. "The public deserves transparency, especially from a company that seems more focused on romantic theatrics than business ethics." A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras clicked. Liam didn't flinch. "You're using a photograph of my wife and me to discredit years of work. Is that your definition of ethics?" Morrison smiled. "The photograph is proof of motive. You married for the merger. You used public sympathy to manipulate investors. It's not personal, Liam. It's corporate accountability." "Then explain this," Liam said, tapping the folder in front of him. "The same encrypted metadata found in your so-called evidence also appears in your company's outgoing network files, meaning the leaks didn't come from my team. They came from yours." For a heartbeat, Morrison's smile faltered. "That's ridiculous." "Ridiculous," Liam's tone stayed calm, but the air in the room tightened. "You planted fabricated data, used Fiona as your source, and planned to take over my company by collapsing its stock. You underestimated how quickly we'd find the pattern." All eyes turned to Fiona. Her hand trembled, barely noticeable, but Sarah saw it. "You have no proof," Morrison said. Liam opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "That's Fiona Clark's authorization code. She's been rerouting internal correspondence to your servers for months. I believe you call that corporate espionage." Fiona's voice cracked. "He said it would just be temporary, that no one would get hurt." Morrison's composure fractured. "You're making a mistake, Liam. This will destroy both of us. I built this company from nothing," Liam said. "You don't get to use my name as your currency." Eleanor rose, then her voice calm and steady. "The Watson Foundation will publicly announce its separation from Morrison Holdings, effective immediately. We'll move forward with the merger on our own terms." The chairman nodded, his pen scraping across the page. Motion approved. It was over before Sarah could fully breathe again. Morrison's face darkened as security escorted him out. Fiona trailing behind, eyes hollow with regret. The cameras caught everything. The downfall, the redemption, the quiet gravity in Liam's expression as he stood at the center of it all. When the room finally emptied, Richard remained seated, his gaze unreadable. "You played that well," he said finally. "You get that from your mother." Liam didn't respond. Richard's eyes flicked to Sarah. "And you. I misjudged you. You didn't just stand beside him, you steadied him." Sarah met his gaze evenly. "That's what partners do." Richard's mouth twitched something between disapproval and reluctant admiration. "Perhaps." He stood buttoning his coat. "Don't let this win make you complacent. Empires fall fastest when built on emotion." When he left the door shut, with a final echoing click, for the first time in days, the room felt still. Liam sank into a chair, pressing his palms to his face. Sarah crossed the floor quietly and sat beside him. "You did it," she said softly. He let out a tired laugh. "We did it. Though I think I just aged 10 years. You look fine for 45. He peeked through his fingers. "You're cruel." She smiled, resting her chin on her hand. "You like it." "I do," he admitted. The silence that followed was soft, this time, filled not with fear, but with something gentler, relief, maybe. The storm had passed, and for once, there was nothing left to fight but the ghosts in their own hearts. When they finally left the building, Manhattan greeted them with sunlight breaking through the clouds. The street below buzzed with reporters' flashes and questions, but Liam didn't stop. He reached for her hand, not for the cameras, not for appearances, but because he needed to feel something real in all that noise. She squeezed his fingers, steady and sure. "What now, now?" he said. "We start over. No contracts, no headlines, just us." "Us," she echoed. "That sounds terrifying." He smiled. "It should." Months later, summer found them back at the lake house. The world had moved on, as it always did. Morrison was indicted. Fiona disappeared into quiet obscurity. The merger had not only survived, it had flourished. And somehow, between the chaos and the healing, they had found a rhythm that didn't need defining. Sarah sat on the porch barefoot, sketching on a notepad, while the cicadas hummed in the trees. Liam joined her, 2 mugs in hand. "You know," she said, glancing up at him, "I never thought peace would look like this." He settled beside her, handing her a mug. "That's because we didn't earn it easily." She smiled. "Do you ever miss the chaos?" He looked at her, eyes softened by the late afternoon light. "Only when you're quiet too long." She laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You used to hate noise. I used to hate feeling anything he said. Now I think that's the only thing worth chasing." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a long while they said nothing. The lake shimmered gold in the fading light, calm and endless. Sarah traced the rim of her cup, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we'd still have found each other if things had gone differently?" Liam turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe not in the same way, but I think we were always headed toward something that felt like this." She met his gaze, the warmth of it quiet and sure. "Something real. Something inevitable," he said. As the sun dipped below the horizon, their reflections merged in the window glass, 2 silhouettes against a world that finally stopped asking them to prove they belonged. And in that stillness, in the hum of the evening and the steady rhythm of his breathing beside hers, Sarah realized that sometimes love wasn't about conquering the storm. Sometimes it was about learning to live after it.